Welcome to the Michael Collins Centre at Castleview. I'm standing in one of our outdoor exhibits. It's the recreation of the Béal ambush site, and of course the evening Michael Collins was shot there was four vehicles in his convoy. Leading was a motorcycle scout, Lieutenant Smith, riding a Model H Triumph motorbike. Then there was a Crowley tender, like our replica here, a troop lorry. Coming next was Michael Collins's Leyland 8 touring car, and coming up the rear was a Rolls-Royce whippet armoured car called Schlievnemann. The convoy at Béal on the evening that Michael Collins was killed was led by a motorcycle scout, Lieutenant Smith, riding a Model H Triumph motorbike. Here at the Michael Collins Centre in Castleview, we actually have an example of one of those bikes, which is actually a restoration project we're working on at the minute. Now, of course, in this bike you have some modern parts. At the moment we have a replica fuel tank. The mudguards and tyres and saddle cover are all new, but the engine, gearbox, frame and other bits are numbered, and the machine itself would be dated 1919, so it would be of the Collins period. Now, there was 30,000 of these motorbikes made, and of course they hadn't your modern twist throttle that you have in modern motorcycles. You had to adjust these levers for the speed, and if you didn't get that right, you could actually burn out the valve in the engine. And of course, every couple of miles going along the road, you had to push down that plunger which put lubricating oil into the engine. And if you didn't do that, the engine would seize. And if you were going up a hill, you would have to give it an extra drop of lubricating oil as well. Now, the evening Michael Collins was killed, of course, the only other casualty on Michael Collins' side was the motorcycle scout, Lieutenant Smith. And he was actually shot in the neck while lifting Michael Collins off the road after he'd been shot. Now, Smith survived the whole thing, but he left the motorbike at Béal up against the ditch, and believe it or not, it was used by a local man called Bruno O'Donoghue afterwards, going around to farmers milk recording, and the bike afterwards disappeared. Crowley tenders came into Ireland in big numbers with the Black and Tans in 1920, and most of their vehicles had seen service in World War I. They were reconditioned. Most of the Crowleys came equipped with a high canvas hood over the top to keep off the rain. But the Black and Tan soon discovered when they were being fired on by the IRA from behind hedges and stone walls, they needed to be able to shoot back, so they threw off the canvas hoods. When the vehicles were left open like this, however, the IRA then began to toss hand grenades into the open lorries. So to keep out the grenades, the Black and Tan sometimes put metal cages over the top, onto which they put chicken wire. The idea was you could shoot out through the chicken wire, but it stopped the hand grenades from going in. That was fine until some bright spark in the IRA came up with the idea of attaching hooks onto the hand grenades. And when they'd throw the grenades, they'd hang onto the chicken wire cage. And imagine sitting opposite there and seeing this thing across the way about to go boom. The Black and Tans, of course, weren't finished with that. Their next move was to bring out IRA suspects with them on patrol. And they might put one poor man standing in the back of the vehicle like that with his hands tied up to the cage. Sometimes they would put another prisoner sitting up on the bonnet in front with his hands manacled back to the frame of the windscreen. And if they got caught up in an ambush, well, guess who was going to get the first bullet? Over the years here at the museum, we've heard an awful lot of stories from visitors of how IRA suspects with their hands tied behind their backs would be tied with a length of rope onto the backs of the Crowley tenders. And for a bit of a laugh, the Black and Tans might travel along initially at a few miles an hour, but sometimes it went a bit beyond that, and men were dragged to their deaths behind these vehicles during the War of Independence, and also one or two cases in the Civil War as well. Michael Collins that day was driving in the Leyland 8 or Leyland Thomas touring car. It was called the Leyland 8 because it had 8 cylinders in the engine. It was called the Leyland Thomas because it was designed by a Welsh automobile pioneer called John Godfrey Parry Thomas. The last vehicle in Michael Collins' convoy the evening that he was shot was the Rolls-Royce Whippet armoured car. And of course the Rolls-Royce Whippets were designed for use by the British in World War I. They bought limousine chassis off Rolls-Royce and put armoured bodies on top of them. In 1922, when the Irish Army were taking over from the British Army, they bought 13 Rolls-Royce Whippets off the British. And the Irish named all of their armoured cars. Michael Collins' one was Schlievnemann. Some of the other names included the Big Fella, the Ballinalee, the Customs House and the Baby. Now, when we built this replica, which is based off the original, which is held by the Irish Army up in the Curragh Camp in County Kildare, we put a few of the original features of the armoured car into the replica, including these doors in front. If it was quiet, you could drive along and leave the airflow into the radiator to keep the big Rolls-Royce engine cool. But as soon as bullets started flying, you wouldn't want to forget to pull the two handles inside in the turret, but shut the doors here in front to prevent the radiator being shot out. As well as that, on the side of the vehicle on both sides were heavy planks. They were called trenching boards. If you were going along the road and you came to a trench that the IRA would have dug out to block the road, you take off the two planks, lay them across the trench, and you could drive over them like a bridge and continue on your journey. The evening Michael Collins was shot at Béal, the Crowley tender or troop lorry had on board 8 riflemen. Most of them are armed with the Lee Enfield rifle like this gun I have here, the 303. There was also 2 machine gunners, and they were armed with Lewis machine guns like what I have here in front of me. And of course there was 2 officers as well. And that evening at Béal, it was the motorcycle scout followed by the troop lorry that came in contact with the anti-treaty IRA, who were removing the mines up at the top of the S-bins at the northern end of the ambush site. Up at the top of the S at Béal, there was an exchange of shots between both sides, between the anti-treaty IRA and the men in Michael Collins' convoy. The anti-treaty IRA got off the road and up onto the high road on the convoy's left, and Michael Collins' men then followed him. And what resulted was a running battle up on the hill on the high road, with both sides exchanging gunfire. We know from the last photograph taken of Michael Collins alive in Bandon outside of Lee's Hotel the evening that he was shot. That was taken around 7 o'clock. He was sitting on this side in the back of the yellow touring car. His officer Emmett Dalton was here, and Corrie and Quinn, the drivers in front, who took it in turns to drive the car. The first sign of trouble for them at Béal was when the windscreen of the car shattered and the side panels were hit with bullets as they rounded the corner where the monument is now at Béal. Straight away, Emmett Dalton, next to Collins, shouted to the driver to drive like hell, but Michael Collins reached forward, he tapped the driver on the shoulder and he said, "No, stop and we'll fight them." All the men in the car, including Michael Collins, jumped out and they started returning fire at the anti-treaty IRA, who were firing down onto the convoy from the hill on the convoy's left. In the recreation of the ambush site here at the Michael Collins Centre, we have the vehicles much closer than what they actually were at Béal on that evening. They would have been 70, 80, maybe 100 metres apart in some of the cases. And that evening Michael Collins started off, after getting out of his car, firing from behind his car from the bank at the anti-treaty IRA, who were firing down from the high road in front of him. Then, with the jamming of the Vickers machine gun in the armoured car and Michael Collins seeing the anti-treaty IRA running off from right to left on the high road, Michael Collins himself ran to the back of the armoured car, fired a few shots off the ammunition box for a few minutes, and then he shouted back to his men, "Look lads, they're running up the road." And then Michael Collins stepped out onto the open road, walking back about 15 yards behind the armoured car. He fired a few shots with his rifle and was in the process of pulling back the bolt once more, and the next thing, bang, he was shot in the back of his head. After finding Michael Collins shot on the road that evening, his men put him into the back of the armoured car, pulled forward to a safer position and took him out there on the side of the road. And with his back up against the front of the right hand mudguard of the armoured car, it was there Michael Collins' men went bandaging his head and saying the act of contrition into his ear, and after a while they noticed Michael Collins' face go pale. He closed his eyes and he was gone.